Yeah, let's kick things off. Before I fully introduce Nick, I do want to go over briefly who IdeaScale is and why we brought you here today. IdeaScale is a leading idea management platform. We are FedRAMP certified and actually one of the few platforms in the space. We really take ideas. We empower governments to harness the power of crowdsourcing to drive innovation. We were established in 2008, actually from a White House initiative. Since then, we now empower over 4.5 million users annually to share their ideas. All right, and now I will introduce Nick. So Nick Kittle is a speaker, thought leader, coach, facilitator, and best-selling author of Sustainovation, Building Sustainable Innovation in Government, one wildly creative idea at a time. He spent the last 15 years in government, most recently serving as a chief innovation officer. During his government career, Nick directed 17 different divisions and founded one of the first government innovation offices in the country. A three-time national award winner, Nick has developed over 65 unique or first-of-their-kind pilot projects while directly generating 7.8 million in savings and pioneering the concept of innovation value. With that, I will pass things over to Nick to get started.
Thanks, Lizzie. And I'm really honored that everybody took time out of their day to come join us today. It's going to be hopefully a lot of fun, very informative for all of our Americans. Thank you for joining us. For all of our international folks, thank you for joining us as well. We really appreciate it. I'm going to go ahead and kick us off. Sorry, we're going to get back here to the starting position for these slides. There we go. We got the right start. There we go. So my name's Nick Kittle. We're going to be talking about the power of Sustainovation today. And what excites me most about the conversation I get to have with you today is that I'm going to run through the actual practical how-to. So what do we do to actually structure an innovation program and how that functions, what it looks like. So I enjoy this because usually I'm trying to help people convince or come around to the way of thinking that innovation is necessary in government. In this case, I get to talk with the practitioners doing it. So it is my honor to be amongst you today. And that's what I want to talk about. And what I want to do is start off with a little bit of a weird conversation, which is the past a good predictor of the future? Is the past a good predictor of the future? What do you think? Maybe just drop it in the chat for a second. What do you think? Good predictor of the future? What do you think related to that? It's getting some yeses out of that. Yeah, it's a good predictor of the future. Most people would say yes. Most people feel like, yeah, the past is a good predictor of the future. I usually like to follow that up with a second question, and it's this one. Do the past and the future look alike? Now, in my experience, when I've done workshops with folks and I ask these questions and I use polling data to do this, what I found is about 80% of people will answer yes to the first question. The past is a good predictor of the future. But roughly 3/4 of people will answer no, the past and the future don't look alike. So I just want you to take a second to absorb that for a second. It's an interesting thing to think about. And if you think the past and the future look alike, I just want to burst your bubble for a second here. Let's try this out for a second. 140 years ago, there had never been standard time. Every single one of us knows down to the minute exactly what time it is today. It's managed by an atomic clock, and we all set our lives to what I'll call standardized time. And yet 140 years ago, there had never been standardized time. And yet we rule our lives by it. 80 years ago, it was normal for us to use leeches as medicine. And I want you to think about picking up your kid from school for a second. If you go to the school and the nurse says to you, hey, I just want you to know little Timmy was feeling sick, but we let out the bad blood. We put some leeches on him and they feel fine now. I think we'd have something to say about it. But 80 years ago, that was normal, was for us to have leeches to let out the bad blood as part of our medical practice. How about this one? 30 years ago. 30 years ago, the smartphone had never existed. And yet it is something that 2/3 to 3/4 of the transactions we have with the public are occurring on smartphones. 30 years ago, it didn't even exist. Or how about this one? Maybe you remember, some of you remember growing up on equipment like this, playground equipment like this. You know how to do this slide, by the way? The right way to do that slide is to wax it on a hot day to make sure you get the burns. Or how about this one right here? You can actually see the imprint of where the child is hitting the ground. I bring this up because this isn't how playgrounds are made tomorrow. And by the way, I found all of these pieces of playground equipment in one park in the middle of Kansas. Probably the deadliest park I've ever been to, but at the same time, it's funny to think about. Even this isn't normal for us anymore. What we grew up with isn't normal. What happens, though, is we recognize every time that the past is the same, we make a mental note. Yep, that's history repeating itself. But we don't make a mental note every day for how the past is not repeating itself. So it seems to us like the past is a good predictor of the future, when in fact, the past and the future are radically unrelated. And this is yet another example of how the future and the past don't look alike. What you're seeing here is a picture of something called C. elegans. C. elegans is this wonderful little nematode that has a genomic sequence that when one of those markers is switched off, it can actually double, triple, or quadruple the lifespan of this nematode. Well, they found that specific genomic sequence in another set, and that's us as humans. It is entirely possible that within some of our lifespans, they will find a way to double or triple our lifespan. Now, I know what some of you heard is, I can't retire, Nick. No, that's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is, how would that fundamentally change everything that we do? And so here it is, the future and the past don't look alike. And if we recognize that, then what we have to also recognize is that the way we've always done it, WWADI, probably the most hated term for all of us. I call it WADI, WWADI, the way we've always done it isn't going to work. It, along some time frame, along some horizon, the way we've always done it will not work, which means that innovation is the hedge against the risk of the way we've always done it. And if we can acknowledge that, then we can recognize the power, the true power of innovation, which is that it is the thing that will allow us to get out of this situation and to get us into something that hopefully works better for the future. And if you don't believe me, recognize that in our business, doing nothing has very real consequences. We can look at bridge failings. We can look at what happens when we don't properly regulate something. And if you don't believe me, here's the thing, save a few bucks this year. Don't update any of your IT systems. Don't patch anything. Save a few bucks, right? The truth is, doing nothing has very real consequences in our business. And so it's incredibly important for us to step out into a new space and recognize that, which means that it's not actually risky to innovate. It's risky for us to not innovate. The only question becomes, how do we do it well so that we actually achieve the results we're after? And that means different things to each one of us. Now, when I talk about it, I help folks understand why innovation is so difficult for us. And it's something that you see pictured right here. I call it the river of our experience. And what I want you to do is picture a raindrop hitting this hillside. And as the raindrop hits the hillside, it carves a little path. And as a raindrop hits in the same spot, it carves a little deeper path and a little deeper path until it becomes what you see here on this hillside, which is a pattern of erosion. Our brains work in the same way. We're hit with a stimulus and we learn how to process that stimulus. And as we get more comfortable with processing that stimulus, it becomes the river of our experience. It says, this is the right way to do something. Now, that's incredibly useful in our daily lives. It means we don't have to relearn to drive a car. We know that a stove is hot. We know how to tie our shoes. So it serves a purpose in our daily lives. The river of our experience has value there. However, when it comes to innovation, it's the exact opposite of what we want. We have to shake off the river of our experience in order to actually take in what's truly happening there. Here's another example that maybe you can relate to. Maybe you can see this, and as you look at it, it looks like it's moving, except for the part where it's not. Or how about this optical illusion? Can you see the black dots that aren't there? Yeah. Or how about this one right here? What if I told you these are two round concentric circles that are not touching? Maybe you can see that. Maybe they look wavy to you. But maybe now you can see they're actually just round circles that aren't touching. Or this is one of my favorite ones. If you look in the gray area, you'll notice mountains and hills. But if you look in the white area or the black area, the only thing that changed was the position of the shading. You see, what happens in an optical illusion is our brain fills in the missing information incorrectly. And that's true for so many things that we do in life. Many of us probably commute to work the same way every day. And of course, when you do, you are hyper aware of everything happening around you and you're paying attention to everything, right? Oh, no, wait a second. I'm sorry. Did you half show up to work, maybe partially listening to a podcast and wonder how the heck did I get here? That's the optical illusion in our brains. That's the river of our experience taking over. And then one day there's a detour, or the route that you take isn't. You're not able to take it. There's something that stops you from doing it. And then all of a sudden you become hyper aware. But maybe the way that you take or commute to work becomes a lot less stressful. Maybe you notice a church or a park that you never noticed before. All of a sudden, that little false trauma woke up your senses and helped you recognize what's actually happening. And that is so important for us when we get into innovation, is recognizing that we have to be creative and shake off the river of our experience in order to access ideas that are uncomfortable or abnormal for us. And that's part of what I try and help folks understand is that innovation is creativity implemented. We have to be able to do both. We have to be creative. We have to implement. If we don't do one or the other, we're not actually innovating. That's what I love about what IdeaScale is doing is it's giving us greater access to ideas through the creativity portion of it and helping us manage the implementation side of the equation, which is how we make it real. And so these are the two parts of the equation I want to plug us into when we talk about Sustainovation. Now, for me, Sustainovation has those two elements, creativity and implementation. I'm going to walk through the wheel of Sustainovation here for a second and just sort of walk through my mental process as I look at this and what I try and help communities across the country and internationally understand about how we do this. So first of all, is getting good at asking why. We're not good at it, but why is how we drill down to the root cause of an issue. You'll also notice when you ask somebody why they do something, they tend to get really defensive about it. So let me give you a quick tip. Start off by asking how. Tell me about how you do this. You can tell that that's got a very different feeling than tell me about why you do this. One makes you defensive. The other is an invitation to a dialogue and a discussion. That's allowing us to break into a different space. So when we think about why, try how as a way to lean into it. And it allows us to get down to the real root cause of the issue we're trying to solve. So we're not solving symptoms, but solving real problems. Creativity and perspective is next on the list. The truth is the creativity has been trained out of us. I'm going to get into that in a second with a NASA study that proved that very case. But we've got to learn to be creative and train the creativity back into you. Now, for my history and something unusual about my background is my dad was the president of research and development for Dow. My mother is a famous quilter in California. So I grew up with creativity being a requirement. I did not know how unusual that was until I entered the workforce. But I want to teach you a couple of the best things that I know related to creativity so that we can spin that up. Growing ideas. We can brainstorm better, friends. The truth is what we ask folks to do is something along this. We have a problem that's existed for 30 years. All I need for you to do is show up at 8 o'clock on Monday and be infinitely creative on demand in 1 hour. Does that sound crazy? It should, but that's how we brainstorm today. So I'm going to give you a tool and a tip to help you get better ideas out of your workforce and your teammates. And then we got to prove the concept out. Pilot projects are how we win. As Lizzie mentioned at the beginning, I have over 65 unique or first of their kind pilot projects in my career. And the goal here is to learn lessons about whether something works or not. If it works, we spin it up. We grow it. We create a program out of it. We fund it. If it doesn't work, we say, you know what? Great idea, wrong time. Maybe not a great idea. Maybe we didn't do what we were supposed to do. We failed horribly at it. Those are all okay, but we have to have a permissive culture, and pilot cultures are permissive cultures. Then it becomes about implementation and how we do that well. When I was a public works director, it was really easy for me to say, this is the direction we're going. I had the authority to do that. When I became a chief innovation officer, part of it was about convincing people to come along. So the question becomes, how do we lead by inspiration when we do not have the authority to get something done? I imagine many of you struggle with this. That's why the engagement is so important. That's why finding a way to lead people, even without authority, is such a critical part. That's Team Us. That's my leadership philosophy. And then actionisms are about putting plans into action. Anybody got a plan sitting on a shelf anywhere? If you raised your hand, I can't see you, but I appreciate your participatory nature. I'll just say that's the truth too, though, is we got to find a way to get action behind our ideas. In doing this in the public space, we've got to build our armor. The truth is, if I'm a Fortune 100 company, I'm able to do R&D behind closed doors. I'm able to try out concepts that may be uncomfortable behind closed doors. In the public sector, we don't get that. We have scrutiny. It's difficult to deal with the public. We're dealing with hard things. So we've got to be tough, and we got to toughen ourselves up. So I'll talk through one or two techniques for that, and we got to get better at selling our ideas, friends. We use way too many 3-letter or 4-letter acronyms. We use words that the public doesn't understand, or we don't even understand internally. If I say something like, hey, we're installing riprap along the riparian corridor in order to reduce the turbidity of the water, do you know what I said? I imagine I've got an engineer on here somewhere who's like, yeah, we're putting big rocks next to the river to make the water clean. Why can't we do that and talk like a human? That's how we bring people in. Our goal is to bring people in, not shut them out, right? So when we talk about that, it's about selling our ideas and how we do that better. So I'm going to give a little bit of this in brief here and walk through some of it, and then we're going to get into how we create the program that we're actually after. So as I mentioned, why is the key? Why allows us to drill down to the root cause of the issue? You know, the Lincoln Memorial had the Lincoln Memorial statue had an issue about a decade and a half ago where portions of the statue were flaking off because they were using a caustic chemical. And so they brought in the staff and they said, "Hey, why are you using this caustic chemical to clean the statue?" And the staff said it was just taking us too long to clean the bird crap off of the statue. And the supervisors were like, "Wait a second, why is there bird crap all over the statue?" "Oh, well, the birds are there because they eat the spiders." I'm sorry, why are there spiders there?" "Oh, well, the spiders are there because of all the insects." "Well, why are there so many insects?" "Because it's the only lights on at night, which brings the insects, which brings the spiders, which brings the bird, which brings the bird crap, which brings the need for a caustic chemical." So originally, the answer that they were solving for was work harder. And where do you think they landed at? Turn off the lights. And now the lights go off 30 minutes before dawn and turn on 30 minutes before dusk, which eliminates all those problems. Why is the fundamental key to getting down to the root cause of the issue we're trying to solve? The way that I learned it is ask why until people become uncomfortable, and then ask why 2 more times. Whatever that is the root issue that you're trying to solve. And again, people don't usually react well to the why, so we use how. Tell me about how you do this. Very different conversation to get us to lean in. As I mentioned, the creativity has been trained out of us. NASA, who is a customer of Idea Skills, a customer of mine is, by the way, they did a study, and what they learned over a 15-year study was that at 5 years old, at less than 5 years old, 98% of us are creative geniuses capable of what's called divergent thinking. Divergent thinking is the ability to self-generate unique thought. However, by the time we hit 30 years old, less than 2% of us are creative geniuses because the creativity has been trained out of us. And maybe that resonates with you. If I were to say, when you're young and you ask your parents, "Why is the sky blue?" You know, maybe some of them gave an answer about the refraction of the rays and those kinds of things, but probably a lot of you might have gotten something along the lines of, "Because I said so." And then you go to school and who's got the answers? The teachers. And then you go to work and who's got the answers? Just kidding, it's not your boss. It was a trick question. If you answered your boss, no, no, no. Look, the truth is we're taught somebody else has the answers throughout the course of our lives. So we actually have to train the creativity back into us, because what people think is creative, 98% of us don't know. We're not creative geniuses. So we've got to find a way to get creative and train creativity back into us. One of my favorite shortcut hacks that you can use too is this: flex, fuse, and fracture. Any great innovation that you think of probably involves one, two, or all three of these elements. Flex. How can I bend the rules of the situation? Fuse. How can I take two or more unique or individual thoughts and put them together in a new or unique way? And fracture. How can I take something and break it into its little tiny pieces? Any innovation that you think about involves one, two, or all three of these elements. So if you're looking to brainstorm with your team, or you're stuck on a problem that you can't get past, have this as a technique in your back pocket: flex, fuse, and fracture, and see the wild ideas that your team can come up when we start to break down the rules of the situation. So I love this as a creativity shortcut. It's a great technique. Another thing we've got to recognize is that creativity comes in waves. It's when you're most creative. Now, I'm an artist. My mother is an artist. I would imagine, and I hope some of you out there would say, I'm an artist too. But what I want to ask you is this question: when do you feel most creative? So Lizzie, can we put up a poll? I want to see where everybody's at. So right here's a poll in front of you. Take a moment. We're going to take about 30 seconds. I just want you to chime in. When is it you feel most creative? In the morning, in the evening, driving, showering, drinking and thinking, exercise, meditation, or something entirely different? If it's entirely different, let us know in the chat. Let us know in the chat what your other is. Super curious about that. We'll just give it another 15 seconds or so here for everybody to chime in, but let us know, when are you feeling creative? Sylvia says when playing sports. Thanks, Sylvia. Appreciate that. All right, let's throw up those results here and see what we got. So hopefully you're seeing this. 26% of us in the middle of the night, 22% of us in the morning, 19% of us in when we're exercising or meditating, 11% when we're drinking and thinking. So we've only got 11% from Texas, and 4% of us with other. That was a Texas. Sorry for the Texas joke if I got any Texas folks on, but hey, you know. What I want us to recognize about that, though, is we're all creative at different times, which is why when we say show up at 8 a.m. on Monday, I had a 1 in 4 shot at maybe you feeling creative. Maybe. So we have to allow people to be creative when they feel creative, not when we want them to feel creative, which means we have to restructure how we brainstorm and solicit for ideas. One of the other powerful things that Idea Scale helps us do is allows us to be creative when we feel creative and not when we're telling people to feel creative. When you have that brainwave, you can enter the idea. That's where we see the real magic happening, is not forcing people to be creative when we tell them to, but allowing them to be creative when they actually feel it. And so we can be better about how we actually structure that into our innovation programs themselves. One of the techniques I like related to that is to brain dump before we brainstorm. Brainstorming, by its definition, is convergent thinking. You see, the reason that we have problems when we brainstorm is there's some things that prevent us from being successful. One is only one person can speak at a time. So it's self-limiting there. Two is people will not want to look foolish. They don't want to say something that may seem against type or something that is wild and out there. So one of the things that we can do is ask for ideas before we even get into the first brainstorming session. One of the ways I like to do this is I will send out the exact thing we're trying to solve for, the exact concept we're after, before we get in the session about a week before, and ask people and solicit people for ideas. What's your wild idea on how we might solve that? You will get 25 to 35% more ideas because that's divergent thinking. It's people self-generating unique thought, which we now have walking into the brainstorming session, because people will not say something in person sometimes that they would say in private or when others are able to help them put that voice out there. So ask for ideas before you ever get into a room, and you will get 25 to 35% more ideas because we're able to engage in divergent thinking, one of the most powerful tools we can use. So again, recognize, ask for those ideas before you get in the room, you'll have a lot more success. And then piloting ideas is so important to us. Pilot every idea you can. You know, it's funny because in the IT world, we don't go around and do full system implementations without ever testing out the concept. If you do, you probably have a former chief information officer. So when it comes into that, we've got to make sure that we test out concepts before we actually go full scale with them. So that's part of it. It allows us to make sure that data is driving our decisions. And the most important thing we can do when we pilot a concept is to be honest, because in innovation, honesty is our currency for success. If I always say to you, that was successful, that was successful, that was successful, you're not going to believe me at a certain point. But if I'm happy to own the successes and the failures with the same level of honesty, people will trust you at your word with this, which is so important. I've just encountered so many folks who either don't track data, they feel so strongly about something that it skews their viewpoint on it, in which case it ends up being unsuccessful when it goes to full-scale implementation. So pilot programs are your chance to, one, create a permissive culture, two, help folks understand that learning is part of failing and failing is okay, and that is a culture shift. So this is where we create that permissive culture. And also, we're not committed fully to every idea that goes through a pilot program. Some stuff works, some stuff doesn't. That's the nature of life, friends. So that's what a pilot program can do for us, is allow us to scale up or scale down a concept. And that's what we want to focus on. And then, of course, team us. This is that concept of, for many of you, I would imagine you're not in the position of authority necessarily within your organization. You probably have a lot of influence, but how do we lead by influence when we don't have authority? I personally believe that a rising tide lifts all boats. I believe that that which unites us is greater than that which divides us. I love the way that Archbishop Desmond Tutu said it, which is to say that our differences are not designed to separate or alienate us, but to teach us our need for one another. And that's what I believe. This is what it's about, friends. The fact is you may have something that you're passionate about, but asking somebody else, what's your passion? And then putting your time and effort into helping them accomplish their passion builds deep loyalty. it builds a coalition of the willing, which is how we get everything done. So just recognize that it's about calling people in, not calling them out. That's something my wife would say. So I love that, which is to say it's about building that resiliency, that collective resiliency into what we do. So recognize that if you're struggling to get your program off the ground, how have you committed yourself to other people's causes? Because that will allow them to turn around and say, you know what? I want to commit myself to your cause. Sometimes people talk about who do you deal with first? Do you deal with the haters? Do you deal with the people who aren't going to get it? I say ignore them. Start with the people who get it. Start with the people who are part of your coalition of the willing, who will get on board. Build from there. Worry about building momentum. And that's where we start to gain. That's where we start to win at. So that's the engagement piece that we want in this equation is calling people in, helping get their stuff off the ground. And recognize that any idea that we have that's innovative, we have to establish urgency around it. If it's not urgent, people will not do it. Look, they got enough to be going on with. And, in the 100+ communities that I've worked with here over the course of the last 7 years, I can tell you that this is one of the most important things that's missed during an innovation effort of any sort, which is establishing why this is so critical. Because the number one complaint I get is, ain't nobody got time for that. I'm sure you get it too. I'd love to innovate. We just don't have time to do it. We have to make sure that people know it's so critical that if we don't do it, we would be irresponsible. And if you can't build that case, chances are it's not urgent and it might not need to be dealt with yet. So recognize that this is a critical part to bring others on board. It is step one in getting people to make a change, is establishing that urgency. The other thing, and this is hard sometimes, trust me, I know, is that people will get on board after you're successful, not before. And this can become really difficult because you've got this great idea. You just need people to buy into it. Just trust me, I got this. No. The way it works is you achieve the results. Next thing you know, the haters don't want to talk as much. They'll get on board. It's the bandwagon. They want on board. I used to be more of the type of person of, hey, you didn't want to be on board then, you're not on board now. May the bridges I burn light the way. That is not good management, not good leadership, by the way. What I learned is the better way is if you want to get on board, you're on board. Welcome on board. Thank you for the support, and people will resist you less next time. So let people on board, but just recognize they won't get on board until after you're successful. It's rare that people do. So just be aware of that. And at the end of the day, this is how we sell just about anything. Be bright, be brief, and be gone. Be bright. Get your energy up. If you're not excited about what you're talking about, nobody else will be. Period. Be brief. People don't need to know everything you know in order to make a decision. They need to know what they need to know in order to make a decision. And those two often are not the same things, especially when it comes to elected officials, senior leadership. Recognize there's a difference between what you want to say and what they need to hear. And be gone. Richard Branson famously said, I'll never keep doing business with somebody who keeps selling me after I said yes. Well, that's true for us too. Be bright, get your energy up. Be brief. People need to know what they need to know. And be gone. Once you make the sale, leave the room. Don't stick around. Thanks for your decision. I appreciate it. I'm out of here. If you respect people's time, they will respect yours as well. And time is the only gift that we can't get back. So recognize this is how you sell just about anything. Do what you got to do to be here. And I'm sure you can do it. And at the end of the day, haters are going to hate. It's a T-Swift law, my friends. This is some Taylor Swift law coming at you. You will never be, I'm just going to burst your bubble right now. You will never be universally popular. Not everybody will love you. You are not chocolate. You are not pizza. So with that out of the way, recognize there will always be people who hate what you do. There will always be people who don't like how you show up. You will always be the villain in somebody's story. Just don't be the villain in your own. And recognize that this is the part where we separate ourselves. And we say, you know what? I believe in what I'm doing. I understand that people don't get it. Maybe they'll get on board after. Maybe they won't. Maybe they're just going to stand in my way, but I don't have to deal with that. I don't have to tolerate that. I'm going to keep going forward. Do that, my friends, okay? But Taylor Swift rule, Taylor Swift law, whatever you want to call it, haters going to hate. Recognize that as well. It makes life a lot easier, especially for those of you that are trying to make a real difference in this world, because it is important. It is not easy. And those are different things. Now, with that said, this is my favorite part, the part I don't get to talk about as much as I'd love to, and I get the chance to go a little more in depth with you today, which is after we help recognize those things, we can build it into the core of the organization. We can do things that allow us, I call them the faves. We can do the faves, which allows it to build it into the DNA of the organization so that our program about innovation becomes sustainable, or we build Sustainovation. There's a couple key elements that I want to walk through. And again, I'm going to get tactical here. So welcome any questions, drop them in Q&A if you've got them so that we've got them later if you have questions, but this is practical. Here is the exact path that I have used and helped other communities use as well. This is what I recommend and advocate for. First off is defining innovation value. What are the keywords and why are we doing this? The reason this is so important, this is another one of those things, is how do you build an innovation program so it withstands political change or the changing of leadership? Well, we ask what innovation means. You see, one of the tricks I've learned is that if I ask you what innovation means, every single person on this call will give us a different definition of what innovation means to them. So it's important for us to define the term for our community, for our business, for our culture, because that can change. And so if we can identify what criteria we're using to judge it and lock that down, now all of a sudden we have mechanisms to judge and rate and rank and fund and report on how our innovation initiatives are achieving the ends we're after. That's why it's so important. A missing step for most organizations I work with. The other one is to create a fund. I'll get into the fund here in a second, but it should not be too large. That's one thing I'd say too. I've seen groups that have built $1 million innovation funds. All that reads as is a workaround to the budget process, okay? So when we talk about it, we need to create an innovation fund for pilot projects. The other thing we got to do is solicit for ideas. Again, something IdeaScale can help you with. We got to get the ideas out of our employee population. When we get those ideas, we need to make sure that we celebrate everybody who submits an idea. We need to close the loop on those ideas as well. So even if an idea doesn't get upvoted, doesn't get the number of, doesn't get the amount of support that it needs, it doesn't get launched, it doesn't get piloted, that's okay. You came forward with an idea and we need to reward that. And it can be as simple as inviting everybody who submitted an idea to a pizza party. It could be dropping them a handwritten note. It can be simple, but everybody who solicits, anybody who puts out an idea needs to be rewarded or recognized for that. And also in that space, not only that, but what happens to you if you're successful? Is it just more work? How do I get recognized if we're actually building successful pilots or taking programs and taking them to the next level? When we do that, there should be award mechanisms. I promise you, in this public sector space that we're in, there will be penalties associated with it if we don't do well. So what are the incentives for us to do well? And I find that we don't have enough of those built into our organizations. So think about how your program might be able to reward people that are doing that great work. And then the question becomes, how can I support you? We want folks doing that work. We want them out there. The question is, what support do they need to be successful? Is it that they need streamlined procurement processes, or they need to make it easier from an accounting perspective, or they need physical on-site support during the day of an event, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? We need to make sure we're asking the questions, what can I do to support you? And we have to train the behavior. We want our employees to be more creative. How are you training them to be more creative? We want them to be better at implementing and taking the steps necessary. How are we making that real for them? We have to train on what that definition of innovation means to your organization. And again, that could be different between different organizations because innovation value is different for different organizations. But we have to train on it so employees know what to look for and how it works and what we mean by it. Then we need to track the data. IdeaScale shout out here as well, but we have to be able to track that data. We have to show that we're doing this in a thoughtful way, and we need to do it in a centralized way. Decentralized tracking, I have learned the hard way as a practitioner. I've seen my organizations do this. Decentralized tracking does not work, period, full stop. You need centralized tracking so that you can report out on what folks are doing. So again, decentralized ideas, centralized tracking is what we need. And then we rinse and repeat. If we have a new political party come in, if we have a change in leadership, we're going to get in front of them in 4 months to 6 months. And if we need to, we are going to ask again, what does innovation value mean? What are the key terms that we're going to use to measure innovation value? Here are some sample criteria that I use. I'm going to show you 2 pages. The other thing you should know is that you can get a copy of this webinar and you do have access to the recording. Okay, so you can get a copy of this if you want these criteria. I'm going to show you 20 of them. I've got 40 of them. Happy to send those to you as well. But these are some things that we might use. Scalability. Can this program be scaled? Impact. We might value efficiency in the organization. Maybe it's innovativeness. Maybe it's customer service delivery. Things like, are we making services more user-friendly? Does it enhance our accountability or transparency as an organization? Does it play into cultural sensitivities that we might have, or does it advance our technological position? These are all very different things for us to judge an innovative idea by. But some of these in your organization right now, are valued higher than others. So we might take these 20 terms and allow people to vote or assign numbers or ranks to these, and then we're going to find the top 6 to 10 terms, wherever the natural breakpoint is, and those are going to be the innovation criteria we use to evaluate individual projects by. And if it scores high on those are projects that we're going to pilot and fund. If it scores low on those, that's not the right time for the idea. So now we have a defined term for innovation that can change over time, can change with political winds, but again, we're able to thoughtfully evaluate and show that we are making discerned efforts to meet criteria that have been laid out for us with us. The other thing we've got to do is build an innovation fund. We've got to be able to fund ideas. We all know in the space that we're in, if it doesn't have funding, it's not real. We got to make it real, friends. So the way that we do this is we determine those criteria, right? The fund should not be too large. And then we need to go through, because it's creating hope for the employee ideas. If you've got an idea and we have money to fund your pilot project, we're making that possible and real for you. If there's no money behind it, it's a problem. It shows you're not serious about this. It's a buzzword without any real meaning. So that's important. Here's the way that I build an innovation fund, and I encourage others to do the well. Feel free to copy this verbatim or steal what makes sense for you. One is it aggravates organizational risk. So recognize that an innovation fund allows organization to take risk, not individuals. You see right now, innovation in your organization probably is this individual is willing to take risk and these folks are not. Well, that's scary. I got to have tremendous courage as an individual in order to be willing to innovate, because it's all hanging on me. And what if it doesn't work? Instead, what if I had 6 pilot programs were getting off the ground, or 6 innovation ideas were getting off the ground? Now I can share that risk because we've evaluated the criteria, we're helping to fund it, and now I can aggregate that individual risk and aggregate it into an organizational risk, reducing the pain point of individual courage. Again, we established that urgency and that compelling why. I talked about that. Select a fund size. My favorite way to do it is to go ahead and say, what would 1 FTE look like for your organization? Whatever 1 FTE is worth to you, that's what I would try and get your innovation fund to be, because the argument that you're making to senior management or the budget office or elected leaders or whomever is, what if I told you you could have the most creative employee that you've ever had, and if they didn't generate ideas, you wouldn't pay them? Because that's what essentially this is. If I had a $100,000 fund, because that's the aggregate average salary for whatever your organization is, I know that might be high, 80,000, 50,000, doesn't matter, whatever the number is. If you can make that case, it's a really hard case to go against, because if I only spend $30,000 of a $50,000 fund, I'm not spending 20 grand. But again, we are building $50,000 worth of opportunity into the organization for employee ideas to come to life and to make that real. So that's the elevator pitch that I would encourage you to use if you don't have an innovation fund. The other thing is get that senior leader on board with it. If you have an innovation officer, that's great, but find somebody who can be that champion at the executive level. And I do mean the executive level. We're talking C-suite, we're talking director or executive director level, whatever your organizational structure. You need to have somebody in the top echelon who can advocate or understand what is happening here, and at least you're able to report into and out of to help understand how the political winds might be blowing, or to make sure that your messaging is reaching the top levels of the organization. And you need to impart reasonable controls. We can't just have a $50,000 slush fund sitting there. So you're going to walk through what are reasonable controls from an accounting perspective, from a FASB perspective, from an organizational perspective. What does that look like? We need to make sure the oversight is there. and we need to have a thoughtful project selection. But now that we have the innovation fund criteria, we can have people evaluate what was the score on scalability. Well, that project is an 8, that project is a 6, that project is a 4. Great, now I've got numbers to back up that data that allows us to move forward. And we have to keep the application process simple. As soon as it becomes complex, people will not do it. Anytime something is administratively burdensome, we have to make it as people won't do it. So we have to keep it as simple as possible. One of the things I love about IdeaScale is they're doing that for you. They're making it as easy as possible and giving you a big kick down the road in terms of the tracking of the data, which is going to be so important when we talk about what pilots are successful and we build that culture around it. Just as a matter of fact, 5-year results with these, 38 ideas submitted through the Innovation Fund and one of the organizations that I worked in. 30 ideas were accepted. We had 8 that were not. 24 ideas were successful by their own measurements and metrics. But we knew culturally that we were being successful when the people who failed were just as proud of their failures and willing to talk about them as the people who succeeded. Here's a couple of different examples here. An iPad rental program, a treadmill desk, which was a dismal failure. I don't have time to get into the story, but it's absolutely hilarious and totally horrifying. Seems simple. The cash closet concept was about helping people who were underemployed or unemployed find work, and was so wildly successful that it was copied throughout the state of Colorado and has been replicated in other states. That took $400 and one employee to come up with that idea. That's now been replicated and is wildly successful. Or even a backdrop and clever and cute names to help adopt out animals at our animal shelter. That's the kind of ideas, big in nature, small in nature, it doesn't matter. These are brilliant ideas that needed to see the light of day, have a little bit of funding, and now have lives of their own. And that's what an innovation fund can do for you. And we have to have, I like an innovation academy. I like to train, regardless of what you read here. Recognize that training and development of what happens next is so important because it is decentralized ideas that make us successful, not centralized ideas. It is not your responsibility as the director of innovation or the chief innovation officer to have all the ideas. You just need to be able to harness other people's ideas. And for that to work, you have to train them on what it means to be successful with innovation for your organization. And again, that can be different. So I'm a big fan of an innovation academy. That is how I have fielded the teams, which then helped to implement those ideas and also judge those ideas in future iterations. So it becomes this alumni program that helps you to continuously spin it up, but also insulates you against organizational leadership changes. So the nice part is, as we train folks up through this program, we're building into the organization that knowledge and culture and wealth of abilities. And then we define innovation value. I'll say that this is a math problem that we created in Colorado Springs because when we started that office, every other program on innovation was centered around social governance and social innovation, not something that would fly in conservative Colorado Springs. So we had to develop a metric by which we could judge and evaluate projects. This is the one we used. However, it can and should be unique to your community. From there, we are tracking the success of these programs. We're tracking centrally the success of these pilots. This is our actual math right here. I'll say this, the simple version of what this chart reflects is that innovation value decreases over time because as the idea becomes implemented, the way we've always done it becomes what that innovation used to be, and its value diminishes over time. So you need a steady stream of innovations, a pipeline of innovation in order to continue to maintain that success. But what I could also tell you about this is that for every dollar invested in our office, we returned $4.75 back to the taxpayer. That's a story I could tell because I tracked the data, we measured the value, and I could prove the case. That's something that we should all be looking for because your innovation program, if it is doing its job, will have that moment. This is another example. This is one of the actual math problems involved in that right there. It was our Viper program, wildly successful. And then we've got to educate. And what that education looks like is it should be employee-led. It should be holistic. It should be empowering. And by that, I mean that it shouldn't be the responsibility of HR to train us all on what it means to live a better life, to do these things. It can be something that your innovation office helps with. So don't just be, harness the power of employees to teach. And that's what we did in Adams County. We taught people how to be trainers. And then We found people who taught things like health benefits of dark chocolate, how to climb 14,000-foot mountains, the signs of opioid addiction, advanced analytical Excel, how to do Prezis and Canva, things that would enhance the workforce. So don't think about yourself as a one-person show or a five-person show. Think about how you can leverage all your employees, turn them into trainers, and create the culture that you wish to see. That's how we continue to propagate this program going forward. And the structure, again, I mentioned this, decentralized ideas, decentralized execution, we support, centralized tracking, centralized reporting so that we're making sure we can build the business case for why the program works. Again, hilarious story behind this photo, but maybe a little too long for the moment that we've got there. And where we begin. We begin where we have permission. Where do we start an innovation program? The elephant. What is the largest, most inaccessible thing that everybody doesn't want to talk about? Start there. The gray area, something that nobody owns. It's between our departments. Nobody really owns it. Start there. Or areas where we've got open support. Those are the areas where we begin. And last but not least, recognize that you always have to manage change. Change is a really difficult thing for most people. It is incredibly difficult for us that are good at it, let alone those that are not. Some people love change. The majority of the world does not. But what I've learned is that we can get most people on board with change. We just have to manage it along the way. And that becomes establishing urgency, making sure that we're building a vision that others can be a part of, and encouraging and supporting others and empowering others to act on that vision. Those are all critically important. And then we have to build on that momentum. So once we have momentum, we keep rolling. It's not one and done. It's not one and done, one and done, one and done. It's a pipeline of innovation that allows us to keep building on that change and to continue to be successful. And just sharing candidly with you, these are the times I lost. These are the things that were consistent amongst the times I lost. Not managing the fear of change, not dealing with location. There's right locations and there's wrong locations to try out pilot projects. Started in a right location. Awareness of the concept. Sometimes it takes a lot more awareness. Typically, we have to communicate 3 times more than we think we do in order to gain people's attention or knowledge. So under communicating has been a problem of mine. Force majeure, act of God. Sometimes things just don't go our way. Sometimes you're holding a styrofoam event on a day where there's 40-mile-an-hour winds and the styrofoam's blowing everywhere. And then the news media shows up and videotapes the whole thing and at any rate, well-intentioned sometimes just get scuttled by force majeure or an act of God, my own ego and not putting it in check. There's a place for that. There's a place to go ahead and have strong personality. There's a place to recognize that you might be blinded to your own inabilities. Not tracking the data. Not tracking the data is a huge downfall for so many people. You've got to track data to prove it. Track 1, 2, or 3 things. That's it to start with. You can always track more, but again, don't make it administratively burdensome. Market research is important versus personal preferences. You can have a really vocal minority. They may not represent the interests of the community, and you got to be aware of that. And politics can trump performance. The hardest losses I've had in my career weren't that it was a bad idea. It was that it got wrapped up in the politics of people being political. It was a brilliant idea. It just wasn't going to fly because the politics turned against us. So those are a handful of the things that I've personally experienced in losing at different points during my career. And I just wanted to share those as potential pitfalls along your path as well. So I want to say thank you for what you do. IdeaScale, myself here at Sustainovation, we appreciate and honor you. That's why we're doing this, because we want you to be successful. I know we've got some Q&A and I want to open that up. If you'd like to connect with me on LinkedIn, feel free to scan the QR code. And with that said, we'll open it up to Q&A, and curious if you've got any. And thanks for the time today. I appreciate and honor you.
Thank you, Nick. That was so great. I really love that.
Thanks, Lizzie. We saw a question come in. How are we doing?
Yeah. So if anyone would like to submit more questions, the Q&A box is at the bottom. I do have one question coming in the chat. They're wondering if the innovation fund criteria you named, I think it was like 20 or so, you said you actually have like 40, or a lot of them. Should they be quantified, or are they yes or no criteria?
I like to quantify them through a numerical value. So I usually use a scale of 0 to 10. And as we evaluate different projects, score a given project through a 0 through 10 ranking on that criteria. So if we said scalability, it might be a 5. That way we're putting an actual number to what other people, that's more of a soft feel. So it's a way to create a hard number around something that's more of a soft feel, but at least it gives us something to refer back to justify why we chose a given project. It's a lot harder when we have nothing to justify. So it's a lot easier for us to do it. But I don't like, and sometimes it can be yes, no, like for example, one of them might be like legal compliance or something like that. Of course, everything should be legal. That's probably not a 0 through 10. Everything needs to be a 10, right? If it's not legal, we shouldn't. But so you might have some that are like that, but I rank them on a 0 through 10 scale. That's been my experience.
That makes sense. All right, we have another one. How would you connect the innovation fund concept to intellectual property development and commercialization in an academic setting?
Ooh, that's fun. Read it for me one more time. That was a good one.
Yeah. How would you connect the innovation fund concept to intellectual property development and commercialization in an academic setting?
Yeah, much trickier. Great question. I think part of it has to be what is the current. I think this is where I would look to awards and reward mechanisms, because to my mind, there's this inherent value in having your idea proven to work or not work. In the space of like intellectual property, though, are you giving it away, and is there a future benefit to you as an individual by giving away IP? And so I definitely get that. And I think that's an interesting thing because I would have a difficult time innovating in an environment where there was no benefit to me for the innovation and the work and the sweat and the tears that went into it. So I'm curious about the reward and award mechanisms on the IP side of the equation in that environment. Because I think that should be flushed out more, or otherwise, I'd say you have a significant and somewhat intentional disincentive in place for people to innovate. So I think that other piece, sort of what happens down the pipeline, has to be addressed before you're going to get people willing to commit their ideas to you. That's, I think, just a hard truth. Um, so I don't know that I have a great answer. I think it's just more about what happens when I do have a successful idea through an innovation fund. Well, what
Mhm.
happens on the other side of it? Does the university own all the intellectual property and you get nothing out of it? Or is it a fair trade-off for you, given your place in your career, to say the proving of that concept allows me to accelerate my career, and therefore it's a fair trade-off to me? And I think there should be revenue share for that. I would think of it similar to an NCAA athlete being able to gain sponsorship, on some level. It's like, okay, you're creating value. Shouldn't you have a percentage of the IP coming out? And I think it's reasonable to advocate for that. Um, that's a tough one, more nuanced, and I would love to dive into it with whomever came up with that one, but that's a fun one, in a horrific way.
I know intellectual property can definitely get tricky. So, understood. Great answer, though. We have another one in from, let's see. What are your top recommendations for tracking ROI of an innovation program in government specifically?
Absolutely. Yeah. For ROI, I do use innovation value a lot, the formula that we came up with, and I think it has a lot of value. So, one, let's recognize that most people don't understand basic net present value calculations. And I think that is absolutely critical for anybody on this call. Understand what net present value looks like, how to calculate it, why it works, and what it is. If you haven't done that, look it up. And I think that is something that needs to be talked about with others as well, because what happens is an innovation that happens today might have a 10-year sort of value cycle to us. Like we might be getting $100 a year every year for 10 years. We need to recognize the value of that innovation on the front end, not over the course of the lifetime of that innovation. And so part of that is making sure that we understand how ROI is calculated for our community, for our organization, and how our finance people value and calculate it, and how our leadership values and calculates it. And I've seen all of that. The other thing is that we got to recognize and get buy-in that opportunity cost is value. So that's a catch for us as well, which is it hard dollar savings? Is that the only thing that counts for us? Okay, then we know that we have limited parameters. What about soft dollar savings? What about the value of better onboarding?
Mm.
Can we calculate that? Well, we can. We could take the amount of time that's saved through better onboarding times our average salary for an employee times the minutes saved, and we can calculate a value related to that. What about having forms in Spanish instead of just in English, or in French instead of just, in German and French instead of just. Is there value to that? Yeah. Well, we can take the median statistical area of value of a salary in a given location and multiply that times 15 minutes saved times we can get things down to numbers and time. Those are things that most people understand. The inherent beauty is more difficult to be calculated. But again, happiness, morale, beautification, those are all things that have intrinsic value, which is harder to calculate. But if we can agree that those calculations have value, then we can build it into the model we use to calculate innovation value. So I'll say is most things can be reduced to time or money. We just have to get folks to agree that when we save a half FTE's worth of time, that we actually are creating value to the organization and that we're going to calculate and quantify that value. If we can get that, then we're off to the races. The other stuff is a little trickier, but that's how I would pursue it, is just get folks locked down into what actually matters, because it's really difficult to have a conversation later where they're like, well, that was just a half FTE. They're doing something else now, so it doesn't count.
Right.
Okay, well, what does count? You know, um, so it's just locking people in, and they can change it later. We just got to get them locked down into something now.
Do you find that people are usually very accepting of the equation that you presented? They probably value it a lot because ROI is so complicated in innovation.
I think net present value and ROI are always winners once people on the other side actually understand how you're calculating it and how it's calculated and why it creates value. So I think those two are just really easy ones. I'll say this, there's always a hurdle because those aren't really actually well understood terms and their calculations aren't either. So there is work to be done there. What I find is that when they're involved in the process, and I like to bring in electeds and senior officials to go ahead and help determine those words for the innovation value. And then when they see their own words reflected back to them in the risk profile that the organization's doing, they get a pride of ownership in that. And so it's like usually what I'm after, I don't go for consensus. I'm not interested in consensus. It's a fool's errand. That means agreement or accord. We're not always going to all agree on something. What I'm after is consent, which is no significant objection. And that is a very different thing. So you may not love environmental sustainability, but everybody else does. And that's what got voted up. So that's how we're measuring it. And we agree that a calculation is important. So I find that it gets us over sort of individual disagreements and into a shared collective framework. Sometimes it's more accepted than others, but I find that usually people have no framework, which makes it really easy to target people as opposed to processes. And I'm just trying to get us into a process place.
Definitely, definitely makes sense. I think that's all we have time for today. I do want to remind everyone you will get the recording as well as the presentation following the webinar. Nick, thank you so much for being here today. That was a great presentation. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Lizzie, and thank you everybody for being a part of it. I appreciate your time and thank you for what you do.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining. Have a great day. Bye.